Are you now, day before the draft, still of the mindset that Jayden Daniels is worthy of the first overall pick?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nothing's changed. Look, we've had these discussions over the years, Rich. I don't necessarily kind of like follow consensus for the sake of following consensus. I never have. Jayden is just someone that, as we move through this process, when you watch how repeatable his mechanics are, how consistent his feet are, how consistent his upper body is, how consistent he is with throwing the football and putting it where he needs to put it, change arm angles when he needs to, throw the football short, intermediate, deep, run when he needs to. People say, well, you know what? He's one of those guys. This is what's interesting about Jayden Daniels. This is kind of one of the things that's come up about him. Well, he doesn't throw outside of the pocket and throw out of structure enough. But last year, we used to say the same thing about C.J. Stroud too, right? Yeah. That he doesn't create enough, and that's why everybody loved Bryce Young, because he could create outside. And you talk to coaches in the NFL, they don't want quarterbacks to live in that environment anyway. They want it to be something you can do, not that you have to do. Jayden can do it. He just doesn't have to because he can win from the pocket. And so I think with him, he's got it. To me, he has got the perfect skill set for today's game. Coaches want you to win from the pocket, be able to threaten all three levels of the field, and take off and go 70-80 like Lamar if you needed to. We've seen him do all that. He accepted the challenge of transferring from the Pac-12 to the SEC when people were telling him not to. They didn't think he was ready for it, to go down there. You see the jump from year one to year two at LSU that this guy made? Yes, of course. Malik is a good wide receiver. Brian's a good wide receiver down there. They all elevated one another. Jayden had some fantastic, and I'll tell you what, this is kind of what topped it off for me. Mm-hmm. You cannot get a true evaluation on players unless you see them in person, up close, and you kind of stand next to them. That's kind of what did it for me when I went to see C.J. Stroud last year. When I was around Jayden and I saw him interacting with Malik and interacting with Brian Thomas and and how he was running his workout and watched the ball come off his hand, I'm going, that's the one. That's the guy. And that's not to say I didn't like Caleb, because I loved Caleb. All that crap that I had heard about him and people said, I was like, forget all that. Mm-hmm. I like this kid. And because you like one doesn't mean you hate the other, although in our world that's what it is, right?
Sure.
But I got this feeling that I got very similarly to C.J. Stroud when I saw him in person, was around him. I said, that would be the one that if I was picking first, that's what I'd take.
So do you think him going to Washington, because that's where it seems like he's going to go, unless do you think that's possible that he doesn't?
Yeah, I do. I think anything's possible. Look, I think it's likely that that's what winds up happening.
Yes.
But I think also, look, for Adam Peters in the ownership group in Washington to want to take one last look at all these guys together, on the same day, in the same kind of environment, like took them to play Topgolf and all that, spend some more time with them, like back to back to back. Like if you were comparing things, you'd love to have it fresh in your mind, a one-to-one comparison, like on the same day, like the same minute, right? You wouldn't want to like look at one thing and then 20 days later compare it to the next thing, because you'll forget a lot of things. That to me signifies that it's not just a slam dunk that it's going to be Jayden. Otherwise, why would you do that this close to it?
I have no idea, man.
Why would you do that?
I mean, you're the evaluator.
I'll tell you this. I tell this story all the time. In 2004, when we drafted Sean Taylor in Washington.
Yes.
The night before the draft, he was not number one on our top 100 board.
Who was?
Kellen Winslow Jr. was. That was who it was going to be. Mm-hmm. We went into the room the night before the draft. Scouts, position coaches, ownership, Joe Gibbs, everybody. And we got after it. It was darn near 50-50 down the middle who we wanted. And everyone had a chance to say, what they felt. And I went home that night thinking, man, we're going to draft Kellen. Because Joe was adamant. He thought he could just be special. Came back in the next morning, I remember walking in the draft room and looking up at the top 100 board, and there's Sean Taylor at the top.
What happened?
Somebody's argument was pretty compelling. I know I was adamant about it. Greg Williams was our defensive coordinator at the time.
Yeah.
Greg Blash was our defensive line coach. Jerry Gray was there as one of our DB coaches. Steve Jackson. I mean, we got after it with the offensive staff. I mean, it was one of those very productive but heated debates. So it can happen at the last minute, in the last hour. You could wind up changing your mind. So I think anything's on the table with Washington, although it seems likely and makes sense that Jayden would be the one. For me, look, he'd be the number one pick. So we wouldn't even be having this discussion.
But what about, I mean, in all straight up, I love this. Louis Riddick here on the Rich Eisen Show. Ryan Poles, though, I mean, in Chicago, and I know he wasn't there. He wasn't there. He had nothing to do with Trubisky, and he had nothing to do with Justin Fields. Nothing to do with him. But for him to now potentially switch up and go Jayden Daniels and follow.
Which won't happen.
It won't.
Right.
Because
he's set on who he wants.
Okay.
And see, you know what? Like I had this discussion with someone. I said, well, you know, I would like to at this point have my mind made up. Like I would, even though I understand what Adam's doing in Washington, I would like to have my mind made up. And they said, well, why don't you think about it this way? Why does Ryan have his mind made up already? Why isn't he taking this to the very? Why is he so dead set on Caleb being the first guy? And I said, well, you know what? I mean, look, if you're convicted, you're convicted. If you believe that that's your guy, then you believe that's your guy. And, of course, a lot of Chicago Bears fans got upset with me for even suggesting that, going, you don't know what you're talking about. Caleb is generational. Caleb is Patrick Mahomes, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just like, oh, whatever, man. Look, whatever. But the point is, like, I remember Poles said this. He said he is dead sure on being able to evaluate the player, the skill set, the traits that he thinks are befitting of a guy who's the number 1 overall pick. It's getting the person right. And the person as it relates to fitting into your environment. That's always the real challenge. Obviously, he feels as though Caleb fits and checks every box for him as far as being that number 1 overall pick. And in Washington, they're making sure. And that's why, I'll tell you, after Caleb goes off the board, I'm going to be sitting there going, okay, folks, let's see what's happening here now.
So you think?
I think anything can happen.
Because everybody thinks 4 is kind of when things get started.
Well, why not 3? I mean, it's funny because Elliot Wolf says, hey, we might move up. We could move down. We might sit here.
I mean, move up.
I know. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. But I think that position, that spot is open for business too. I really do think the one thing I think we all know is this: just when you think you know, you don't know.
That sounds very Jim Morris Sr. right
There's
there.
No question. Exactly. And you never will know. You
almost went full Morris Sr. on me right there, Louis Riddick.
That's
you almost did it. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.